At 8:15 we begin a new series, Soundworks. Radek Boschetti and Roland Pease physically break up the sounds of music, splitting acoustic atoms to find the building blocks in the sounds we all enjoy. That's Soundworks at 8:15. The time now, 7:30, Greenwich Mean Time.
Brain of Britain, 1998. A nationwide general knowledge contest for the title Brain of Britain 1998. The chairman is Robert Robinson.
Hello. Well, you either know it or you don't, and not all of us would be ready to let the wide world hear which category we belong to. But our contestants have pluck as well as wit, and they are, from the south of England this time, Rod Lipscomb, an education officer from Faversham, Mrs. Judith Bennett, school teacher, now retired from Chalgrove, Oxford, Robert Robson, civil servant, now retired from Bedford, and Michael Holdridge, a pharmaceutical representative from Belvedere in Kent. As ever, you have 10 seconds to dredge up the answer from wherever. If you get 5 questions right in a row, you get an extra mark. Mr. Lipscomb, then, what is the medical name for the condition called lockjaw, to start on a merry note?
Tetanus.
Yes. What is the name of the bay on which Cape Town, South Africa, stands?
Friendship Bay?
No. Mr. Holdridge?
Is it Walvis Bay?
No. Mr. Robson?
Halls Bay?
No. Now, Mrs. Bennett, have a go.
Elizabeth Bay?
No, it is Table Bay. It's your turn, Mrs. Bennett. What did Q do in Ian Fleming's James Bond's stories?
He was the quartermaster. He provided all the gadgets.
He did, you're right. Can you name 3 of the people who were to accompany old Uncle Tom Cobley and all to Widdicombe Fair?
Jan Stewart, Bill Brewer, Peter Gurney.
Yes. And the others, but, you know, any minute the audience will break into song. We can't have that. In which book are there chapters entitled Dulce Domum, if I pronounce it correctly, Dulce Domum, or even Domum, if you like, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and The Return of Ulysses?
Wind in the Willows?
Yes. What was the 1997 European Treaty amending and extending Maastricht, which the Commons agreed to in November 1997?
Copenhagen?
No. Oh, come, have a guess. Mr. Lipscomb.
Lisbon?
No. Mr. Holdridge.
The Hague?
No. Mr. Robson. Don't be left out, sir.
Brussels?
No. The Treaty of Amsterdam. Mr. Robson, when national insurance was introduced by Lloyd George, it was promoted with the catchphrase, 9pence for how much?
2pence.
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Pound?
No. Well, you couldn't have 9pence for a pound. I mean, no, I'm not going to say any more. I'm in danger of giving it away. Mr. Holdridge.
Your family?
No, but that's very sensible. You look rather chapfallen, if you use an old-fashioned expression. It was 9pence for 4pence. It was, yeah, it doesn't trip off the tongue too well, does it? Mr. Holdridge, what is the longest river of Ireland, and it's also the longest river of the British Isles?
The Liffey?
No. Mr. Lipscomb.
Shannon.
You're right. That brings us to the end of our opening round and the opening scores. Mr. Holdridge has yet to score. Mr. Robson has yet to score. 2 to Mr. Lipscomb, 3 to Mrs. Bennett. What is the name, Mr. Lipscomb, of the playwright who became president of Czechoslovakia?
Václav Havel?
Yes. What is the dry ingredient that is mixed with linseed or some other oil to make putty?
Chalk?
It is. There is a lane in the city of London called Austin Friars, which gets its name from a priory which stood there. What was the full name of the mendicant order known as the Austin Friars?
No idea.
You don't? Mrs. Bennett.
The Augustinian Friars?
Absolutely right, ma'am. You didn't look as though you were convinced. You didn't know you... Who was the very famous warrior son of Philip II of Macedon?
Alexander the Great.
Yes. Albert Speer was a surprising choice by Hitler as his Minister for Armaments in 1942. What was his profession, which carried no obvious qualifications for the job?
Architect?
Yes, and you didn't think you were right there. What is the name of the channel which is the southern entrance to the Irish Sea?
St. George's Channel.
Yes. The 17th century Archbishop of Armagh, who calculated that the beginning of time was in October BC 4004, also said that according to Jewish beliefs, the world would end 6,000 years later, that is to say October or November 1996. What was the Archbishop's name who got it wrong twice?
Brendan?
No. Mr. Robson?
Usher?
Usher is quite right. Well done. It's your turn, Mr. Robson. How many nights are there in the Arabian Nights entertainment?
1001.
Yes. The character John Jorrocks in Books by Surtees said all time is lost, what is not spent doing what?
Hunting.
Yes, you're quite right. And he drank a lot, as you remember, put his head out of doors to find out what the weather was like, but it was a cupboard he'd opened, and he said of the weather, hellish dark and smells of cheese. Which president of the United States told a newspaper, I've always been conscious of being Irish. I mean, I look Irish. I am Irish. It means a lot to me.
Clinton?
Yes, who else? What is the geologist's term for the warmer periods between periods of glaciation?
Interglaciation?
It couldn't be anything else, could it, Mr. Robson? That's what I thought. Yes, you're quite right, interglacial. But I think what you said was close enough. Before the 2 Victoria Crosses awarded for bravery in the Falklands, the last VCs to be awarded went to Australians. Where did they win them?
In Vietnam.
They did. 5 in a row. And Mr. Robson gets the extra mark. We go to Mr. Holdridge. What was the last government post held by Dr. David Owen, Lord Owen, in the Callaghan administration, 1977 to 1979?
Minister of Health?
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Foreign Secretary.
You're quite right. Foreign Secretary is the answer. And now the scores at the end of the round. Mr. Holdridge has yet to score. 5 to Mr. Lipscomb, 7 to Mr. Robson, 7 to Mrs. Bennett. Mr. Lipscomb, which was the first of Britain's African colonies to become independent?
Ghana.
Yes. The country with the most Roman Catholics is not in Europe. Which country is it?
The Philippines.
No. Mrs. Bennett?
Brazil?
Is correct. Your turn. The 1997 Whitbread Book of the Year was a volume of verse translation by Ted Hughes. Which poet had he translated?
Pushkin.
No, Mr. Lipscomb?
Ovid.
Ovid is right. Mr. Robson, here is a song used in the 1946 film with which it shared its title, credited to Buddy Kaye and Ted Mossman. Which composer provided the original melody?
Till the end of time, long as stars are in the blue, long as there's a spring of birds who sing, I'll go on loving you.
I can't believe they made the most of this benefaction from this composer, but that's a rather mean-minded observation. Who was the original, the composer who provided the tune, really?
Gershwin?
No? Mrs. Bennett?
Chopin.
Yes, it was, ma'am. Well done. And the singer that you heard was Perry Como. Mr. Holdridge's turn. At which motor racing venue will you find the Grand Prix circuit, the National Circuit, the International Circuit, the historic Grand Prix circuit, and the Stowe Circuit?
Silverstone?
Yes, you're quite right, sir. Though these days the golfer Jack Nicklaus is very popular with the crowds, at the beginning of his career he was unpopular because he threatened to dethrone the hero of what was known as Arnie's Army. Now, who was Arnie?
Arnold Palmer.
Yes, you're right. To which particle in the nucleus of an atom does the atomic number refer?
It's the number of protons.
Yes. At the beginning of January 98, the BBC celebrated the 70th anniversary of the world's longest-running daily radio programme. Which programme?
Thought for the day?
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Farming Today?
No. Mrs. Bennett?
Today programme?
No. Can't have been going for 70 years.
No.
What you mean is it seems like it. No. Any idea, Mr. Robson?
Shipping forecast?
No. Mr. Holdridge was close, but I didn't get the nod from... No, look the way he shakes his grim head.
It was
how he
after
shakes
the service.
his
Morning
hoary
service.
locks at me. The daily service is quite right, yeah. And now the scores are 3 to Mr. Holdridge, 7 to Mr. Lipscomb, 7 to Mr. Robson, 9 to Mrs. Bennett. Mr. Lipscomb, Roy Jenkins ended a review of Anthony Selden's biography of John Major by quoting Lord John Russell's father on the man who was Prime Minister from August 1827 to January 1828. An amiable man with some good qualities, but none of them in any way making him suitable to be Prime Minister. He was a Viscount, and his family name was Robinson. Who was he? Viscount what?
Castlereagh?
No. Mr. Robson?
Liverpool?
No. Mr. Holdridge?
Melbourne?
No. Mrs. Bennett?
Rosebery?
No, Goodridge is the answer. Mrs. Bennett's turn. Of what type of rock are the columns of the Giant's Causeway made?
Basalt.
Yes. What is the meaning of the Japanese word banzai?
Well done.
No, Mr. Lipscomb.
Holy Wind?
No. Mr. Holdridge?
10,000 years.
I think that is close enough for us, yes. Well done. May you live 10,000 years, it means, you know, so it's really a cheerful observation. It's Mr. Robson's turn. What is the collective name coined by Dryden, adopted by Dr. Johnson, and applied to such 17th century poets as John Donne, Abraham Cowley, and Richard Crashaw?
Pleiades? The Pleiades?
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Metaphysicals?
Yes. Metaphysical poets, that's right. Mr. Holdridge, in 1997, the Chancellor Gordon Brown ostentatiously refused to wear a white tie to the Mansion House dinner, but the Defence Secretary politely dressed properly when he went to dine at the Royal Naval College. What is his name?
Sure.
So dressing properly doesn't always get you remembered, eh? But
No,
it may come to you, no?
It's gone.
Gone? Anyone else? Oh, come on. Mr. Lipscomb?
Denzil Davis?
No. Mr. Robson? Mrs.
The
Bennett?
annoying thing is that he's always complaining that nobody recognises him. I can't remember his name. I don't
Yes, but you can't. You're rubbing it in now, Mr. Robson. This is really rather harsh. Mrs. Bennett, have you a clue?
Not a single
The
clue.
Defence Secretary goes round defending things. It's Mr. George Robertson. Oh, dear me. And at the end of that round, the scores are 4 to Mr. Holdridge, 7 to Mr. Robson, 8 to Mr. Lipscomb, 10 to Mrs. Bennett. And halfway through, we come to a couple of questions from one of our listeners who throws them, as it were, like a slingshot at all our four contestants, as though they were Goliath, I suppose. Mr. P.J. Hill from Liverpool asks, first, all four of you, 3 countries have St. Patrick's Day as a national holiday. Ireland, of course, is one. Can you name one of the other 2?
St. Patrick's Day, correct.
Give it a try.
For want of anything better to do, we'll go for Chile.
Oh, no, they don't have a St. Patrick's Day in Chile. A lot of other saints, but they don't have that. It's either Canada or Montserrat. So bad luck, really. So Mr. Hill, if he is Mr., I'm not sure, he just says P.J. Hill. She does, he does. The second question, the province of Ulster has 9 counties. Which 3 are in the Irish Republic?
Yeah, let's try that. Yeah. Donegal, Sligo and Clare.
No. Donegal you got. But Cavan and Monaghan are the other two. So, hands down, you were beaten by P.J. Hill, who gets a book token and this round of applause. Mr. Lipscomb, which breed of dog was once known as the Waterside and the Bingley Terrier, and during the First World War was trained by a retired British Army officer as a guard dog and a messenger?
Stelium?
No. Now, there are lots of dogs to choose from. Mrs. Bennett?
Labrador?
No.
Bedlington?
No. Now, Mr. Holdridge, just think.
Wirehead Terrier?
No, the Airedale is the answer, with all those tight... Well, it looks like a tight perm, doesn't it? Now, Mrs. Bennett, what did Jabez Wolfe fail to do 22 times early this century? Poor fellow. He failed to do it 22 times. Of course, if he'd succeeded, no one would have remembered him, but there. It was doing it and failing 22 times. What was it he was at?
Swimming the English Channel?
Yes. Again, you didn't think you'd got it, but there you have it. And 22 times he tried it, and 22 times he had to turn over on his back and float, and they hauled him ashore, poor fellow. Mrs. Bennett, who led the army that was defeated by Henry III's son Edward at the Battle of Evesham, 1265. And you a school teacher, of course.
Not a historian, though.
Ah, not my period, as they say.
Prince Llewellyn?
No. Mr. Holdridge?
Simon de Montfort?
Yes, sir, Simon de Montfort. Now, Mr. Robson, why is the Earth more a spheroid rather than a sphere, being slightly flattened at the poles and with its greatest circumference at the equator? You look at me in frank amazement as though I've got a nerve to ask you a question like that. You don't know? Well, okay. Mr. Lipscomb.
Because of the centrifugal force of the spin.
Yes. Don't explain to me why, but that is the answer written down in front of me. Mr. Holdridge, who, or perhaps it might be more helpful to say what institution owns the Vanbrugh Theatre in London, which is now being rebuilt?
The Royal Household?
No. Mr. Robson?
London University?
No. Any idea, Mr. Lipscomb?
National Trust?
No. Mrs. Bennett?
Royal Academy? Physicians?
No! I was very nearly cheating there, Mrs. Bennett, to allow you to go on, because there is a Royal Academy, and it's full stop after that.
Well, yes, it was the look on your face that made me go on.
There you are. You tempted me to cheat, but someone up there was watching, and you didn't get it right. The Royal Academy of Dramatic Art is the answer, yes. And at the end of the round, the scores 5 to Mr. Holdridge, 7 to Mr. Robson, 9 to Mr. Lipscomb, 11 to Mrs. Bennett. One of Chaucer's early poems, Mr. Lipscomb, was the Book of the Duchess. Who was this Duchess's Duke, who was probably Chaucer's patron? Out of time. Mrs. Bennett?
John of Gaunt.
Yes. Your turn. The International Court of Justice occupies a building in The Hague, completed in 1913, and largely paid for by Andrew Carnegie. What's it called?
For want of anything else, Carnegie Hall.
That's lovely thinking, Mrs. Bennett, but it's not quite right, no. No? Can you know? Then I must tell you the answer. Mr. Robson, the EV, that is to say a small e and a capital V, is a unit of energy of moving particles. What is EV short for?
Energy and velocity?
No. Mr. Holdridge?
Electron volt.
Yes, sir, you're right. And it's your turn. What does a dagger or cross mean in the Oxford English Dictionary if it's placed before a word?
Slang.
No. Doesn't mean that. Mr. Lipscomb?
Historical reference.
No. Mrs. Bennett?
Foreign word?
No. Any idea, Mr. Robson? No. The word is obsolete, is what it means. And the scores now, let me tell you. We have 6 for Mr. Holdridge, 7 for Mr. Robson, 9 for Mr. Lipscomb, 12 for Mrs. Bennett. Can you tell us, Mr. Lipscomb, one of the nicknames of the state of Nevada is the Battle-Born State. What is the reason? Battle-Born State.
Is it because it's a base from where American troops are shipped from?
No, it isn't that. Don't know? Then I must tell you it was because it was admitted to the Union in 1864 during the Civil War. Mrs. Bennett, in 1990, Karl Marxstadt in East Germany reverted to the name it lost 37 years earlier. What is it called now?
Karlsruhe.
No. Mr. Lipscomb.
Chemnitz.
Chemnitz is right. Mr. Robson, at the 1997 Labour Party conference, this music we're about to hear somewhat incongruously accompanied John Prescott and his colleagues onto the stage. What is it?
The entrance of the Queen of Sheba.
Yes. I wonder what idiot chose it. Oh, it's a rousing tune and good enough, and why not? And there they all were. But yes, there we heard the Academy of St. Martin's in the Fields, conducted by Sir Neville Mariner. And it's now Mr. Robson again. The next line of Congreve's couplet, "Heaven has no rage, like love to hatred turned," has become virtually a proverb, though slightly misquoted. What is the proverb, namely the misquotation?
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
You're right. What is the title of Millet's painting in the Musée d'Orsay, which shows 2 peasants, a man and a woman, who have stopped work to pray?
The Angelus?
Yes. Which early type of plastic was successfully developed and manufactured by John W. Hyatt round about 1869?
Celluloid?
Yes. And you've always wanted to know that. Not you, Mr. Robson, because you knew it, but the rest of us. What distinguishes a boat whose hull is clinker built?
The planks overlap.
Yes. And there's 5 in a row for you. And Mr. Robson gets the extra mark. Mr. Holdridge, one cause of the demise of the ancient city of Ur was that the arm of the river on which it stood moved its course. Which river was that?
One of 2. That's probably the wrong one, but I'll go for the Euphrates.
You got it right, sir. It's what we call an even chance. What do we call the people who in their own tongue are called Euskaldonak?
Are they the Inuit?
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Basques.
Basques is right. Well done. And at the end of that round, I'll stand the scores. 7 to Mr. Holdridge, 11 to Mr. Lipscomb, 12 to Mrs. Bennett, 13 to Mr. Robson. And this is the last round. Mr. Lipscomb, in what month of the year is the sun furthest from the earth? Is that an 11 to 1 chance or a 12?
December.
No? Mr. Holdridge?
June.
No.
February.
No, it's about 9 to 1 now, Mrs. Bennett. My maths aren't too good.
November.
No, it's July. Mrs. Bennett's turn. The American writer Ambrose Bierce disappeared around about 1913 during a civil war. In which country was that war?
Mexico.
Yes. Before what date, Mrs. Bennett, must a car have been registered to be exempt from road tax?
Before 1960.
No. Now, there's plenty of chance here to just grab a number. Mr. Lipscomb?
1933?
No. Would it still be running, I asked myself. Mr. Holdridge?
1905.
No. Pick a number.
1970.
Near miss, 1973 is the answer. Oh, dear. Mr. Robson, what happens to the eggs of a seahorse after the female has laid them?
The male takes them over and brings them to birth.
Well, he carries them around in a pouch, as Mycroft rather fetchingly puts it, like a kangaroo. Not exactly like a kangaroo, because they can't swim, can they? But then. And he does it looking rather bewildered, I dare say. What is depicted on the state arms of the Republic of Ireland?
A harp?
It is. After the Second World War, Germany lost all the territory she had gained under Hitler, plus some which she had held in 1937. Of the latter, the greater part went to Poland. Which country acquired the smaller part?
Denmark?
No. Mrs. Bennett?
France.
No. Pick a country. We're nearly there. We're nearly home, and you must, Mr. Holdridge.
Czechoslovakia.
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Latvia?
No, it was the Soviet Union. Now, Mr. Holdridge, what state of present-day India includes most of the old Rajput principalities?
Uttar Pradesh.
No. Mr. Lipscomb?
Kashmir.
No.
Rajasthan.
Mrs. Bennett's lights on?
That's what I was going to say.
I didn't hear what he said.
We said Rajasthan, which is what I...
Your light was on. Mrs. Bennett gets it because her light was on. I think, in all fairness, Mr. Robson was saying the same thing and Mrs. Bennett was saying the same thing. But Mrs. Bennett, her light was on first. So, allow me to give you the final scores. They are these. 7 to Mr. Holdridge, 11 to Mr. Lipscomb, 14 to Mrs. Bennett, 15 to Mr. Robson. So, what a close run match it was. Mr. Robson, he nosed ahead, and he's our winner. He goes forward to the semi-finals. Next week, we have 4 contestants from the Midlands, and until then, goodbye.
The chairman of Brain of Britain 1998 is Robert Robinson. The programme was devised by John P. Wynne. The questions set by Ian Gillis and the producer, Richard Edis.